afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's lesson. This week we're going to be reviewing Down by the Riverside and introducing a new song. Now, in regards to Down by the Riverside, as has been very often the case, I assigned to you two different renditions of the same piece. Now, what made these two renditions different from ones I may have sent to you in the past are that these two renditions are in a different key as compared to one another, and the timing in some of the measures is a little bit different as well. And I would like to start out talking about the difference in the timing, because I had some students ask me this week via phone call, email. They came in here for instruction, or we had a Zoom lesson, and they mentioned that the copy of the song that I gave to you that had letters inside of the notes, that copy sounded not quite as authentic to them, right-hand-wise, than the other. And I think a lot of it comes from the phrase, which is repeated more than any other phrase in the song, which is obviously the title here, Down by the Riverside. Now, when you say that phrase, down by the riverside, there's a cadence to your voice. There's a rhythm, a rhythmic pattern to your voice, which in music we call a cadence. And the copy of the song that I gave you better reflects that cadence, down by the riverside. I'm looking here, for example, at the last measure on the first line. If I look at the last measure on the first line, in each song, now obviously the notes are different because they're in different keys, okay? If we look at the one with the letters inside of the notes, we have an A, and a G sharp. They're all evenly distributed in terms of the beats that each note receives. And then there's a quarter note thereafter. And the next measure is two quarter notes, an A, a G, and then a half note E, which that also adds up to 4, obviously. Take a look at the last measure of line 1 in the other rendition. Now, again, notes are higher here because it's in a different key, and we'll cover that in just a moment. But let's set that difference aside and talk about the difference in the timing. It starts out with a quarter rest. Well, the other one starts out with a quarter rest. The difference is how the beats are allocated from that point forward, because we have a quarter note, which is actually the same as the other. But take a look at the next two notes. The next two notes, we have a dotted quarter and an eighth. And there are many instances of this same breakdown in this song. You can look primarily at the end of line 2, the end of line 3. You have the quarter rest, a quarter note, a dotted quarter note, and an eighth. Now take a look at the end of the first 3 lines in the other copy, and they're all even. So that one would almost be as if you were to say, down by the riverside. There isn't that same cadence, down by the riverside. It's down by the riverside. Everything is even. Now, it doesn't mean that it's incorrect. It just means that that copy was looking to use more direct valued notes. They didn't want to make such nuanced changes. The other one obviously has them. But it doesn't mean that you could not change your notes to better reflect the other one. If you like that breakdown of that rhythmic pattern, that cadence of down by the riverside instead of down by the riverside, it's a very easy fix. What you do is you take that measure, in every measure where it looks like this, the quarter rest is still there. Then we'll look at the A here. Well, that A is still an A. It's still a quarter note. The next A is still a quarter note, but we are going to want to put a dot after it. Now the next note, which is that G sharp, can no longer be a quarter note like it currently is, because if it were, I'd have too many beats in the measure. I just took a half a beat away from this note and gave it to this one via the dot. So it turns that note into an eighth note. You want to remember that when you put a dot after a note, it doesn't just simply add a beat. I think a lot of times students have that assumption that, well, I put a dot after a note, it gets an extra beat than it did before. Okay? It can get an extra beat. The idea, though, is a half of the value of the note that preceded it. So with a half note, yes, it would get an extra beat because a half of a half note is 1. We're talking about quarter notes, now we're talking about a half of a beat, so it's 1 1/2. And that's exactly what I'm seeing there. So if you were to want to have the copy with the letters better reflect timing-wise the copy that didn't have them, as I said, I did have a few students reach out to me and ask me how they could go ahead and do that. That's basically what you would do. But again, just like with timing, I want it to be a conscious decision. I don't want it to be this haphazard thing. I don't want it to be something that you just thought about on the fly. I want you to know how to do it and why you're doing it so that you're doing it correctly and, more importantly, you're doing it consistently. Once you make the change, you don't want to go back. Okay? Now, something else that students ran into this week, which I thought was very interesting. Sometimes you can anticipate issues that are going to arise, and sometimes issues arise that you don't foresee. And what's very interesting is that it happened to more than just a small handful of students this week. They struggled with the black keys that needed to be played. Now, I'm referencing here the copy with the letters first. The black keys that needed to be played, first example would be on line 1. There's only 2 of them. I have a flat at the beginning of the line, and I have a sharp at the end. And it has been my experience watching students this week that misplayed one of those notes. And it wasn't always the same one, but they always seemed to misplay the ones that made the mistake. They misplayed one of the 2. Now, if you were here in the studio, what I would do right now is I would take a moment to see if you could tell me why they may have made a miscue there. Okay? And in having had this conversation with some members of our group, some of you came up with some pretty plausible reasons why some trouble may have occurred there for some students. One of them I thought was actually a very good reason that it didn't even really occur to me, to be quite frank with you. But they said, I think that people may have had trouble with the first black key, the flat there, because the flat is closer to the first A, printed-wise, than it is to the second one. And I get it. I get it. If I was to reprint this, I would likely want to make sure that that flat was a little bit closer to the second note because that's the note it goes with. It doesn't go with the first note, okay? Reason being, regardless of whether it's a sharp or a flat, it always is in front of the note that it is attached to, because remember, we always play the music from left to right. And had it been after the note, technically I would have already played the note and I would have said, oh, gosh, I was supposed to make that a flat, I was supposed to make that a sharp. So it's always placed before, even in traditional sheet music. Now granted there, it's placed way at the beginning, and it can serve to cover basically the whole song if need be. But it's still put first. They don't put it at the end. Okay? Now I think that's a plausible reason that a mistake could be made there. Okay? And you know what? Maybe if someone had a mistake at the beginning, that could have been their reason. But I was seeing a lot of issues with mistakes at the end. The G sharp. And in some instances, I don't even know that the student knew why they were making a mistake. One came in and he said, this sounds wrong. I feel as if I'm playing it right, but it does not sound right. What am I doing incorrect? And I sat down for a moment and I tried to dissect for myself, Why are people struggling right here? Okay, now the answer that we just went over is a plausible explanation in part, but the next one, I don't know if that could be used for the next one. I mean, the sharp is kind of in the middle of the two, and whenever you see a sharp or a flat, it is always placed on the line or in the space of the note it goes with. Therefore, you know, that G sharp, that sharp is not only before the note, but it's situated on the line of the G. Okay, they wouldn't put a sharp way up here to be attached to this note. They'd want it right next to it. Okay, that's why this sharp is right next to that G. So same goes here. And then something dawned on me. I said to this student, play for me that first A flat. Go ahead and play it. And what he did was he played this black key here. In the set of three, the one right in the middle. And that's A flat. I said, okay. Play for me the G sharp on the same line. And he looked up, and he played the exact same key. The G sharp and the A flat are the same key. Just as the F sharp and the G flat are the same key. Just as the C sharp and the D flat are the same key. We call those, again, something called enharmonic equivalence. Okay? And enharmonic equivalence is referencing the same tone, but using different names. And it makes a difference in terms of where you're looking at it from. Am I looking at it from the G, or am I looking at it from the A? Okay? Now, when asked about why they were both used, the answer, stock answer that I've been giving, because this is really the answer that I would want to give you at this point, is someone asked, well, why are we using both? My stock answer is, so I can go over this. Okay? There's a little bit more to the answer. We're not going to worry about that right now. Okay? For our purposes, the reason that they wrote it like this is so that I could go over it with you. And the issue I found, and some students said, you know what, I think you're exactly right, because in my head, even if I wasn't consciously thinking of it, I was saying to myself, this can't be the same note, almost subconsciously. My finger goes to it, and I say, well, it looks different than the one I just played. It can't be the same note. Okay? Look at line 3. Same thing. It's a flat at the beginning of the line, a sharp at the end. Take a look at the second page, and take a look at line 3. Now you see the A flat there. The beginning of the next line, I see a G sharp. Now that one did not tend to give students that much trouble, and I think it's because it's on a new line. Okay? Maybe there's a little palate cleanser there because your eyes jotted down to a new line and you are less likely to remember what you just played. I don't know. But that one didn't seem to be as big of an issue. Another one, the next line down. Line 5. It's the opposite there. We have the G sharp and then the A flat. It's just the opposite. They're all the same key. Okay? You want to make sure that you're playing them that way. Don't talk yourself out of this has got to be a different key because it looks different. That's what enharmonic equivalence is. Okay? Now something else with this copy. This one's in the key of F. How can I tell it's in the key of F? Well, my first chord is F, my last chord is F. My last note is F. Another big help. What do we know about the key of F? Well, we know that the key of F, the scale of F, is all of the white keys except for the B flat. If I play all of the white keys and I don't play a B flat, I play a regular B, it's going to sound incorrect. B flat's got to be there in order for it to sound right. Now, is that all I'm seeing in this song, or just B flats? And the answer is, well, no. We just went over G sharp and A flat. Well, those aren't in the scale. The thing about a song being in a specific key is that everything gravitates around the notes in the scale. They're not always only ever used. Okay? Those are the notes that are most often used, but the composer, to their discretion, can go off and use notes that would not fall under the umbrella of the scale from time to time. And you see that here. We just spoke about A flats. Well, the vast majority of A's in this song are A's, not A flats. That's an exception. We spoke about the G sharp. The vast majority of the G's in the song are just that. They're G's. They're not G sharps. There's even an F sharp or two in this song, which really seems to break the rule. But the vast majority of F's are F's. How about the second line on page 2? The end of that line, I see regular B's. So that's breaking the rule in the other direction. So whereas a composer may make a note a sharp or a flat, which normally would not be in the scale, this is an instance where a note that was intended to be a flat was not. It's a regular B. That's just a natural B. Okay? We call all of these things, I like to use the word accidentals, because they're kind of breaking the rule. They're not technically an accident, but they're an accident as far as it not following the scale to a T. And there are not a lot of songs that do. I mean, I guess I should rephrase that. There are a lot of songs that do follow the scale to a T, but there are so many songs that don't. I don't want to say that it's an exception to the rule, because it probably is the rule. The exception to the rule is probably the ones that follow everything to a T. Now, the left hand actually seems to follow it a little bit more so than the right, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit down the road here, but for our purposes here, talking about the melody line, just because something is in a specific key does not mean that those notes will literally be the only notes you'll see. Okay? Great evidence for that in the other copy. The other copy is in the key of C. Okay? But you still run into some black keys there. Now, the key of C is all white keys, right? At least the scale of it. Well, we have to keep in mind that those rules, I don't want to say that they're made to be broken, but they're certainly made to be bent. Okay? Now, everything that I just went over, you would not have gotten had you only played the other one. Okay? And I had some students upset that they didn't get to the other one. So I wanted to make sure that I covered this copy first to let you know there's a lot of meat in this one. There's a lot to go over that you would not have gotten in the other one. We used a beat. A gospel beat, ideally, down by the Riverside's a gospel song, but you could have used something else. I had someone use country this week, and they thought it sounded okay. So you can go ahead and use that. Okay? I also encourage you, if you're using a beat, to use different instrument sounds. I used an organ sound and a piano. Now, for those of you playing on one-level instruments, particularly Lowrys, and even some of the Lowrys that are two-level instruments, if you're playing your right hand with the piano and the organ on the same set of keys, there's a few things that you have to keep in mind. Probably the biggest is that the organ sounds on Lowrys, because Lowrys were at their heart organs. Even though they make one-level instruments now, they, at their heart, historically have been organs. So they have always really prided themselves in their organ options, so much so that the organ sounds on Lowrys are removed from everything else. They're not next to the pianos, next to the guitars, next to the strings. The Yamahas, they're next to everybody else. Even the accordion is in the organs section, but they're next to everything else. Okay? Lowrys, it's different. And I bring that up because, unlike if I was going from guitar to piano, or strings to piano, or saxophone to piano, whatever I was doing, if I was doing one of those, the piano would cancel that other one out. No big deal. But because I'm going from organ to piano, now the reason I chose the organ and the piano to begin with is because it's a gospel song, and those are two instruments that would likely be heard in that type of music. If there's one thing that is very much used, very often used, or two things very often used in gospel music. It's organ, piano, and choirs usually singing. Okay? So I look at that and I say, okay, so my organ is in its own little section, even on the Easy 3 here, it's a little bit removed from the rest. I need to remember to turn the organ off when I turn the piano on, because that's not what I'm looking to have. It says change to piano, not add piano. When I get to the third line on page 2, it says change to the organ, not add the organ. Okay? Now, this is an important distinction, because what you need to possibly do is to make sure your organ is off and your piano is on, alone. And when you need to go back to the organ, you make sure your piano is off and your organ is on. Now, for those of you with two-level instruments that have the capability of putting a sound on one level and a different sound on the other, big suggestion for you all is to put the organ on one and the piano on the other and just be done with it. If I hit gospel, that's exactly what happens. If you go back and watch the original teaching of Down by the Riverside, you'll see I did exactly that. I started on the upper keyboard with the organ, like an organist player would play, and then I brought my right hand down so it was even with the left hand, and that's how my piano was there. Okay? And I had to hit no buttons in order to make that transition. Now, some of you may be playing on organs, and that's not an option for you, but you have these numbers in the middle. Okay, that would start on easy 10s in the latest line on Lowry's, but this goes back decades. Instruments have had these numbers. I often equate the numbers to the preset radio stations that you have on your car. If you want to get to another station very quickly, you just hit the number. One of your numbers may give you piano. Another number may give you organ. It might start out with organ. So when you hit that number, if it gives you piano, it's likely going to turn the organ off, right? When you turn that button off, it's likely going to bring the organ back in, unless another number gives you organ. So there's a wide variety of ways that this one could be set up. Now, do you have to use these particular arrangement suggestions? Not necessarily, they're suggestions. You don't have to do it. But the reason I go over things like this is so that you encounter things in the song that help teach you a little bit in regards to how your instrument operates. Okay? That's always one of the biggest concerns for students when they get an instrument, be it their first one or they're trading up to another one. How do I learn how this thing works? And it's one of the great benefits of our music program, particularly if you've purchased a Yamaha or a Lowry. I'm an expert on both of them. And so I can help you learn how to use that instrument. Historically, having taught for as long as I have found that my students tend to remember things, particularly button related, better when they encounter something that they need to overcome, as opposed to just simply reading something in an owner's manual. I could have very easily led you to the knowledge that the organ sound plays alongside the piano, so you have to turn one off and turn one on. And I could have told you what page in your owner's manual it was on, and that would all be well and good. Are you going to remember it that way? Probably not. So when I give you suggestions, there's oftentimes a lot of thought that goes into that suggestion so as to lead you down the path of asking a specific question or learning something specific about how your instrument operates. I'll give you a great example. I had someone last week that could not make it to any of our classes. She did not have the opportunity to watch the video of the class, but she did get the printout. So she got her printout, she practiced the song, she reaches out to me. And she says, I learned something really cool about my instrument. I learned that if I hit piano, the organ stays on. And what a cool thing that is, because if I ever want to put an organ sound and accompany it with something else, I don't have to worry about holding it down and hitting the other button without letting the organ go, or things that she had run into before. She said, I think that's really cool. And had this song not been written this way, I would have never learned that. And she said, well, with this one, it's kind of a hindrance because I got to make sure I turn the organ off and turn the piano on, but what a nice thing to know. Now, if you don't utilize that arrangement, I don't really care so much, okay? Pick something that sounds good to you, but at the same time, you're not getting maybe the full benefit of learning how your instrument operates. Again, there's a thought that's gone into these arrangements, and they're to lead you down a specific path. And I found that it's much better suited to teach you something that way than to say, what I often say is, let's say one day I were to say to you, I am going to give you a quiz on your instrument next week. I'd like you to read through the first 10 pages of your owner's manual. You're going to do exactly what I do, what everybody does. You're going to cram right before. And you'll probably know it for the 45 minutes or so you're here, and then you're going to walk out the door and you're going to forget everything. So rather than doing that with you, I'd rather have you encounter things which in turn will hopefully allow these things to stick. My hope is that from this point forward, you will remember to a certain degree that your organ sound is likely to stay on when you add an instrument, or vice versa. Okay. Now that other copy, what are things we could have gained from that? Well, one thing we could have gained from the other copy is a different way of writing the song. Because this song appears in the other copy, the one without the letters, to be much shorter than the one with the letters. I mean, I look at the first page, it's only 4 lines long. The other one is 6 lines long, so very short 2 lines there. And on the second page, it's only 5 lines long, and the other one is another 6 lines long, so I'm short another line there. So what did they skip? Well, the answer is nothing. They didn't skip a thing. What they're having you do in that rendition that they didn't have you do in the other is repeat something. We're playing page 1. We're playing page 2. When we get down to the bottom of page 2, we see something that says DS al coda. And underneath in smaller writing, they explain what that actually is, what that means. It says return to, and there's a little symbol that kind of looks like that. Return to that symbol. So the first thing I guess you got to do is you got to find out where that symbol is. You went by it right at the beginning of the song. It was 1 note in. So here we are, return to that symbol. But that's only the DS part. It says DS, the symbol, al coda, play to coda. Okay? That is at the bottom of the first page. Now you went by that the first time. That's a circle with the cross. You went by that the first time because there was nothing in the music telling you to stop there. It wasn't until we got to this DS al coda thing where it said go back to the beginning, or where this symbol is, which could be anywhere, but technically here it's 1 note in from the beginning, and play to the coda, which you already went by once. It's down at the bottom of the first page. Okay, so you go there. From there you stop. And you need to find the other circle with the cross, which is the latter half of the last line on page 2. It's the reason why the last line is broken up into 2 sections, because you never play it all the way through. The first time down, you play the first half of it. When you go back, you play up to the bottom of that first page, and then you jump right to the other half. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, how did they make it shorter? It's 2 pages long. The other one's 2 pages long. But look at how much smaller the other one had to be printed in order for it to be 2 pages long. Had the other one been printed as large as this one is, it would have been at least 3 pages. So students laugh at me when I say this, but this coda stuff that can be a little bit cumbersome, particularly for a beginner, is there to make reading the music easier. It's here to put the most amount of music on the least amount of pages, but here still keep it as large as it can be. Okay? We also this week in this rendition had the opportunity to make the distinction between bass notes and chords. Okay? The bass notes are the letters outside of the box in the left hand. Your chords are the letters inside of the box. And with this one, what I thought was very interesting is that there's a potential octave walk down from C to C. Could be your foot pedal on an organ, could be the keys on a piano, or if you set your organ up to sound like a piano, you can use your keys that way as well. First line, it's not as overt as the second line. It starts out with a C, and then there's a C chord, and then there's a B. Where's the B? Right next to the C. And then there's another C chord. Then there's an A. Where's the A? Well, it's right next to the B you just played. And then there's another C chord. And then there's a G. Well, where's the G? G's right next to the A. So I've already walked down from C to B to A to G. And then when I get to line, the latter rest of line 2, I play the G again, and I go all the way back down to the C. All the way down to the C, potentially the one that's an octave away from the one I started on. Okay? The idea behind these intersecting bass tones and chords are for you to give you the opportunity to make the beat yourself. Maybe you don't have gospel. Maybe you don't have a rhythm at all. Well, if that's the case, this is a way that you can replicate a gospel beat. Okay? If it entails your left hand doing everything, your left hand's going to be doing a little bit more moving than if you're on an organ attempting the foot for these letters outside of the box. Because if you do that, your left hand can stay relatively stationary, the foot plays the bass. Now how about page 2? Page 2 is tricky, particularly the timing with the left hand and the right hand, where you have these instances where you're playing multiple chords, the same chord, all in a row, 7 times in a row in some instances, because there are places where the chords and the notes play together, and there are places where the note holds and the chord continues. So you want to be mindful of that as you're playing through. It can wreak havoc with your timing. Something else that can wreak havoc with your timing here is, and this goes for both songs, a rest at the beginning of many of these measures, particularly when you need to do something with your left hand at the same time. So your left hand goes down, your right hand follows on beat 2. We called that last week syncopation. And my definition last week is the same as it is right now. Syncopation is playing a note where you wouldn't normally play a note, or not playing a note where you normally would. And it can wreak havoc with your timing. So we want to make sure that as we're playing through, we're taking stock in all of these things. Okay? Each one of these renditions has things in it that will assist you in becoming a better player, and also becoming better in terms of how your instrument operates. You become more and more an expert. But I don't want to say that one of them is more superior than the other. I think that they both have their elements that can help you. There are some things in the one that's in the key of F that you will not get in the one that's in the key of C, and vice versa. Okay, if you only got to one of them and not the other, it's no big deal. If you got to both of them, great. Okay? You always have the other one you can take a look at down the road. When we come back, we're going to be going over our new material.